Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Scott Sallee, Social Impact Manager here in the UK. My pronouns are he, him. And I'd just like to welcome you to the dentsu International Women's Day Global Webinar Series. Throughout this week, we're creating a space to have challenging conversations around some of the most pressing issues on gender equality. I'm honored to be here today with an incredible group of truly global women assembled to talk about one of those areas of inequality, women in sport. Now, our social impact strategy demonstrates the most significant impact we can have is through our core products and services and the work we do with our clients. But as a global organization, we also have the responsibility to not only mirror society, but move society in a direction where all people have equal opportunity to thrive. In the last 2 years, we've reached over 525 million people with campaigns related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality, to empower women and girls, ranging from the gender pay gap to gender violence. I also honor my LGBTQ+ community by stating that when we speak of gender diversity, we must also include transgender and non-binary individuals. We must have an intersectional approach that is not just equal, but equitable, one that challenges systemic barriers. Our Consumer Vision 2030 Thought Leadership, which was just released, foresees that the right to choose one's gender will be enshrined by the United Nations as a universal human right by 2026. The same report also predicts the emergence of a FIFA eWorld Cup, becoming the most watched sporting event on the planet by 2028. Esports having the potential to be more inclusive, more representative, and attracting new demographics of fans. Now, sport has such an important role to play in COVID recovery. We have been kept apart, craving the camaraderie, the togetherness, and the energy that sport brings to our lives, as well as the physical and mental health benefits. As society works to build back better, how can this recovery champion women and disabled women? How can we use sports sponsorship and creative campaigns to raise awareness, evoke action, and direct funding towards issues that disproportionately affect women and girls? Well, stay tuned and please do ask your questions. Now let me please introduce you to our panel that will be taking us through these questions today. So Olivia Enquist, our head of marketing for Coca-Cola Sweden. Olivia has a strong passion for business, marketing, and leadership. Her ambition is to make a positive business impact that resonates with consumers as well as in society. Coca-Cola doesn't just produce drinks. Over the past decades, Coca-Cola has turned partnership and sponsorship with major festivals and sports into political and social statements. So, Olivia, could I please ask you, just maybe for a personal story or anecdote, what was the catalyst for you to become a champion of equality?
Of course. I started to work with sports partnerships in more than 12 years back in 2009 when I was working for Panasonic Nordic, who is a top Olympic sponsor. And together with dentsu, we activated several athletes, both women and men, on equal basis, which was a fantastic experience. Then taking this experience and bringing this into working for Coca-Cola since 2015, I could also merge with the Coke DNA, which is about taking a stand in societal issues and also to reflect on the core values of Coca-Cola, which are happiness, togetherness, and inclusion. So they fit very well together. And by bringing sports partnership into the core values, we managed to create some real amazing purpose-driven activities and initiatives as well. It was really empowering to learn about the history of Coke and also how Coke, all the way since the company was founded back in 1886 in Georgia, USA, has been taking an active stand in equality and inclusion. So, for example, Coca-Cola was the first company in the world to feature women in advertisement and also the first to include African-American families in ads. And very importantly, they were all equally paid as well. Then coming from Sweden, Sweden has come a long way on equality, and that's also what we are known for. It is this year, it's 100 years since women got the right to vote in Sweden. But at the same time, we are in an ongoing process where we still have a long way to go. And sports is one of the areas where we really believe that we are not equal enough and we need to do everything what we can and take on our individual responsibility to use our voice both as people but also as brand owners to make a difference. So I have children, and of course I want my daughters to have the same opportunities as my son. So there is no question about that this is really important, and this is something that we need to keep fighting for together.
Wonderful, great to have you, Olivia. So next is Susie Christopher, who's the CEO and co-founder of Untapped. So Susie is strategic communications and inclusion consultant. In her role as co-founder of Untapped, she advises clients from startups and social enterprises all the way to multinationals and public sector bodies, helping them to untap the value of true inclusion and take action. Untapped vision is to build a society where everyone is included. Previously, Susie also led the internal and external communications, brand management, and strategic partnership program for BT's award-winning London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games sponsorship, including the annual BT Paralympic World Cup, which was televised by the BBC and Channel 4. Susie, could we come to you, please, and hear your story of why you are an advocate?
Hi, Scott. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to dentsu for this opportunity. I think celebrating International Women's Day in this way is great. And I'm really interested to hear from fellow panelists as we move forward. So yeah, for me, I've always been a sports fan. I've grown up watching rugby and cricket, and I was very aware that those were male dominated sports where I didn't really have an opportunity to play. And then through my career with BT, I had an opportunity to see the transformational power of sport on underrepresented groups, particularly around women's sport and disability sport. And that led me to be really interested in not only the role of women as participants in sport, but the role of women in sports governance and leadership. And I became a trustee on the board of the GB Wheelchair Rugby team, which basically is one of the only sports where women and men compete at elite level on the same team. So in that way, it's quite a groundbreaking sport. And one of the things we found was that at grassroots level, there is a lot of gender equality around participation, but actually, as young people then go through and get older, there are reduced opportunities for women and girls to play at that more elite level. There are reduced sponsorship opportunities, which is often needed to be able to facilitate that participation. And within the sport structure itself, there's a lack of opportunity for women and particularly disabled women to participate. So I'm really interested in not only women in sport and the role that brands can play, but also that intersectional view of disabled women in sport and where are the opportunities for participation, for sponsorship and for leadership positions to take this forward.
It's an incredibly important point and one that I know we're going to be picking up on later, so stay tuned, everyone. Next, we have Sandra Greer, who's our head of insights at MKTG. Sandra has extensive experience in the sports and sponsorship industry, working for brands, rights holders, and events in the UK and internationally. She specializes in the setup and analysis of multiple research and data sources to ensure actionable insights, to drive strategy, and help clients maximum return. When Sandra's not in her garden, you will find her on the golf course, umpiring hockey, or dreaming about being on the stage. Sandra, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, I've been extremely lucky in sport all my life. I played tennis to quite a high level as a child. And then I was even more lucky that when I finished university, I managed to get a job in insight that I loved in terms of all the data side, but in sport. And that was absolutely amazing. And all through my career, for 30 odd years, not mentioning too many years in that involvement, I've been in a world which is theoretically is dominated by men. And I've really enjoyed myself all that time through it, doing the insight, using the data. And personally, when the body sort of left me and I went on to golf, and I sort of tended to put myself, oh, let's go into another environment that is dominated by men, which is only 10% are actually women. And I really wanted to give back to sport. I've learned a lot through all my career in sport with working in the environment. And just a little anecdote at the end, I have finally managed it after a couple of times at my golf club. I'm the first woman on the board. not as a woman, but for my skill set in 130 years. So I'm really proud of myself, and I'm hoping I can give back to sport through all the learnings that I've had through working in sport as a woman.
I really respect that, this idea of paying it forward and giving back. Thank you, Sandra. And now we have Sarai Bareman, who's the Chief Women's Football Officer at FIFA. Sarai brings a background in finance and football administration to the role of Chief Women's Football Officer. She also brings a lifelong passion for the game, having played from childhood. Encouraged by her father, who was a coach, she pursued her love of the game to the highest level, representing the Samoan women's national football team and becoming CEO of the Samoan Football Association. At FIFA, Sarai has pushed for concrete requirements for women in leadership, greater resourcing and prioritization of the women's games, and is the first person to hold this role of Chief Women's Football Officer. Tell us about your journey so far, Sarai.
Thanks a lot, Scott, and hi, everyone. First of all, thank you very much to dentsu for this opportunity, and I'm really, really excited to get to know some more about these wonderful panelists that I'll be speaking with today. My story, as you said, I grew up playing sports. I was very fortunate as a child. I grew up in New Zealand. I have 3 brothers. We all played rugby from a very early age. As most Kiwis, we all want to grow up to be All Blacks. And later on in life, I switched over to football as a bit of a black sheep in my family. So I kind of grew up in this male-dominated environment in my home, and I was always taught from a very young age as a child, never to see myself differently because I was a female. And actually, it wasn't until later in my life when I moved to Samoa and took up a role in football administration there in the Football Federation that I experienced for the first time discrimination because of my gender. And that really has driven me, I guess, to become an advocate for gender equality in sports. Because there it really became so evident to me that, you know, it's sports and football in particular is heavily male dominated. And as I came to learn later on in my career, women's football has been historically discriminated against institutionally within the game. And, you know, having grown up being able to play sports and not seeing myself any different, I was quite outraged when I was confronted with these realities in the administration and in the boardroom. So yeah, throughout my career, I later on ended up in FIFA. There was a big scandal in FIFA in 2015, which some of you may know about. We saw some top officials being arrested in a fancy hotel in Zurich. And I guess what was a huge crisis for FIFA and for football actually created a massive opportunity for women's football and for women in football. And I'm a big believer in, you know, using moments of adversity as the biggest opportunities, I would say. And certainly for women's football, that crisis has led to a huge overhaul and reform. And I'm now very privileged to be in a position where I can implement some of those changes that came about.
Moments of adversity into opportunity. I love that. Sarai, if I could actually stay with you to help us set the context for this, because you've seen how football can change lives. Sport is such a strong lever of culture, community, and connection. And FIFA has 211 member organizations and more nations than the United Nations. So how do you and FIFA create global societal change? And how do you leverage some of the awareness of these big cultural moments to speak about crucial topics like equal rights and equal pay?
Well, it's quite simple. Football is the most popular sport in the world. It's played by tens of millions of people everywhere. You know, it reaches every corner of our globe, and it doesn't matter in what society or culture or gender or whatever it is. People love to play and watch the game. And when you have a platform like that, as a governing body, FIFA, clubs, member associations, confederations, those of us that are in charge of the game, I believe we have an obligation to use that platform to make a positive impact. And for me, I'm working in the women's game now. You know, I have to look at how we can leverage the popularity of our sport to make a positive impact on women and girls. And one of the beautiful things about women's football, and we saw this in France in 2019 in the Women's World Cup, is that it's about so much more than what happens on the pitch. You know, obviously the game is beautiful, it's athletic, it's fast, we have some amazing athletes. But what we saw happen in France were these conversations that were taking place off the pitch around, you know, equal pay, women's empowerment, the position of women in society. And these discussions, which I'm used to having on a daily basis, all of a sudden, because of the World Cup and because of football, they were thrust into the mainstream. And we saw them on the front page of newspapers, we saw them in the mainstream news. Suddenly, the whole world was talking about it. And that, for me, is the power of football. We've had some amazing big steps, momentous steps for women's football and for women in football. But for me, it's only just the beginning. We have a long, long way to go. As I said, you know, historically, women's football has been discriminated against in our sport, and we just have to keep pushing to see that there will be gender equality one day within the sport.
Thank you. I'm thinking now of another way that we can create this awareness and action. So I'd like to come now to Olivia and look at this from a client perspective. So Olivia, could you tell us about the impact of the Coca-Cola Football Forever campaign? Maybe sort of how the idea came about, what was it tackling, and what was the result?
Happy to. So this was a campaign that we, or initiative, I would say, that we activated in 2019 for the World Cup. And just as we heard before, there was a whole debate going on in media about equal pay in sports. There was a lot of discussions about the difference in women's football versus men's football as well. So we were following this as Coca-Cola and partner both on an international level, but also on the local level to the Swedish Football Federation with great interest. And the whole debate culminated at the National Swedish Football Gala in November, when there was one of the women player that held a really, really strong speech. It was more of a sort of I have a dream speech, speaking out to the young girls of football who were playing, to encourage them to not give up and to not stop dreaming and continue to fight. And that women and men together need to work together to fight for equal rights. And we had been thinking about, so what should we do with the Women 2019? How should we activate, and what's the tension points, and how can we make something of this, and also to take a stand and show the world what we think about equality and where Coke stand in all this. So this was a eureka moment for us, because I was sitting in the audience together with my colleagues and also my dentsu team. And I remember leaning over after hearing the speech saying, like, this is the brief. And it actually became the brief. So the speech from that moment was the brief for the campaign. So we based the campaign on the insight that only 20% of sports-related media is covering women, which is a surprisingly low number. And this is a problem, because that low coverage in media also creates a low public interest, and the low public interest creates a low commercial value and perception for the women. So it becomes all a vicious circle. So to break out of that, we needed to think about how can we make a difference and break out of the vicious circle. I think one of the key players in the national team said it in a really, really clear way, that you can be the best football player in the world walking down the street, but you still wouldn't be recognized by anyone. And that is kind of showing the core of the problematic in this as well, that you're just not known because you don't get that attention or that visibility. We wanted to do something not by talking, but also by acting, and that was really important. So we wanted to give the national football team the stardom that they deserved. So together with the dentsu team, we discussed several routes to take. We would, for example, one option would be that we could buy the media, the 30% that was missing to get to an equal media landscape. But that was not the route that we chosen, but we chose another one to visualize and to step into the debate, which was that we wanted to have a full space and integrated campaign encouraging young girls to keep on the dream and never give up the fight. which was covered in media and in-store campaign, including putting female players on pack for the first time ever in the world, because that has never been done before. And we were also allowed to use the speech from the football gala as the voiceover for the locally produced TVC, just making the reach broader with this clear message that was coming through. And to crown the campaign, we gave 4 of the female players the ultimate proof of stardom. So we made them into statues and we played them in their home towns. It was a bit controversial and it had never been done before. And we had sort of amazing PR response. It was through the roof. And it also evoked a lot of feelings. Mostly it was super positive. We had a wonderful response from our consumers, players, and also partners. But we also had emotional reactions resulting in that the statues were on several occasions also vandalized, which was really difficult to see for us. So we continued to renovate and to put them back, and we were never giving up on that. We wanted to have them out there and not to remove them from the market. And it's hard to believe that statues of female football players actually can cause feelings strong enough to go out with tools and on purpose try to destroy them. But this also put some fuel into the debate further on as well, because this was also made into sort of breaking news, and we reached even New York Times with this. So we were both in national and international media with this campaign. And all in all, we have never before seen such a positive results, both from business perspective, but also in the reputation as a company. And also the relation that we have with the Swedish Football Federation and the female players is a very, very close one after having had this campaign as well. We outperformed also Euro 2018 results, even though that was a sort of record summer because it was also very hot. So that shows that taking a stand and really doing something that was taking a little bit of a risk and a bold statement really sort of paid off. And we were able to clarify to the consumers even more where we stand on these topics as well.
When you were talking about how they were vandalized and how that sort of recharged you, I felt that emotion myself as well. I almost went, but how dare, you know, so I completely can empathize with you too. I'm seeing some of our panelists sort of smile and nod as well, and sort of what that evoked in us is, you know, how dare you? And if anything is, you know, we're only going to come back stronger. It's only going to rally us more. So bring it on.
Yeah, exactly. Never giving up.
And I mean, I know that this is just one piece in the wider social purpose that Coca-Cola aims to have. And it's obviously a topic that you're really passionate about, and something that our research confirms with one of our CMO surveys show that actually 75% of CMOs agree that associating their brand with a social purpose will be important to that ongoing consumer engagement. Do you have any thoughts, or can you share your vision of sort of the future of purpose marketing?
I think that we have more and more products out there, and it's a more and more busy climate that we're operating within. And consumers will choose the product that they can relate to and that they can associate with. So we need to help them in their choice of brands and products. And we need to be clear on why a consumer should choose our brand over a competitor's. So companies need to be clear on who they are and what they want to achieve, as this is what also adds value to the consumers. I think that's important. There is a quote from Batman that I kind of like, which is that it's not who we are underneath, but it's what we do that defines us. So it's not who we are underneath, but it's what we do that defines us. And I think that's kind of clear, that we can say and we can show, but when we do, that's when we really make a difference, and that's where we really land in the hearts of the consumers. And that will be increasingly important going forward.
Absolutely. Judge us by our actions and our impact.
Yes.
So Sandra, I'd like to bring you into the conversation, please, because obviously you do a lot of work developing insight for leading brands like Coca-Cola and others. So could you have any thoughts or shares about the opportunity for brands to connect with a female sports audience?
Yeah, so I'm not talking about actually female sports here. This is the female sports fan. And we do a huge amount of work at MKTG trying to connect brands with particular audiences and across different platforms. And sport is obviously one which has great reach. And women are a major part of the sports fan audience and the whole level. So Forbes estimate that 70 to 80% of purchasing decisions are made by women. Now, that is a huge number. And with the sports fans themselves, a lot of them are female. And often when we're doing work, people tend to concentrate on the male sports fan and the male audience. And really, I think often the female sports fan is a forgotten fan in many ways in terms of trying to connect to them. And that's the important element of the fans. We've always got avid sports fans out there, male or female, but they're a very small proportion of all of the fans. So I think when we're looking at female sports fans, we've got to understand them. And that's the really important element. They want to hear different things. It was interesting to hear about Sarai about off the pitch. And that's quite often what women's sports fans want to know. The avid fans will want to know every shot, how it was played, all of that. But they want to know more about the lifestyle. You know, in the Women's World Cup, I remember them going, well, you know, how did they get there? How did they travel? What did they do with their families while they were traveling? How did they get where they were? How did they fit it into their lifestyle? And it is very much about that lifestyle area and making that connection of how they want to be talked to. One of the worst things you can do is talk down to the female sports audience. Remember, they're those decision makers. They really, really are important to talk to. And they can also drive sales. I mean, everyone's being hit by loads and loads of messages all the time. But if you can make that connection, see where they've got that interest in the sports. Is it through their family? Is it their own interest? Is it their husband, their partner, or whatever that is making that connection? If they're making those purchase decisions, they might be not a direct fan. They might be an indirect fan. And so when brands are putting on pack, for example, like Olivia said, you know, they might be buying for someone else. So that on-pack promotion is actually an indirect sale to somebody who can see a competition that might be interesting for their children, their partners, etc. in that basis. And work we've done really does show that if you can connect to the female audience, show you're supporting something that they really are interested in, and you can be seen to be giving back, you can really get to sales. You really can. And we've seen that across a lot of our work in that side. So also we're seeing, I was talking to our Australian office the other day, and they were saying that they work on the Big Bash Cricket League. And they realised that this was supposed to be inspiring people of or everybody, men, women, children, to want to play and get involved in cricket. And they've now put at the heart of everything they do, family and fun. That is important, really, really important in those different areas. So really, from my point of view, is I would say to brands, don't let the female fans be your forgotten audience on that side.
That's powerful. Thank you. Sarai, could I maybe ask for a reaction or response to that? Is there anything in the FIFA strategy around engaging with this audience? Obviously not sharing anything too confidential, but, you know, very keen to know what your thoughts are here.
No, I really love what Sandra said about the purchasing power of women. Like, I just feel like it's such an huge opportunity for, you know, organizations to tap into. Interestingly, in women's sports, when we've surveyed, for example, our audiences, we actually have more male fans than we do female in women's football. But I think the point of difference for women's football, and I guess this comes to what you said about, you know, organizations understanding that they need to align with a social purpose, is that women's football does represent a social purpose. It does represent women's empowerment and gender equality. And so many organizations and brands are trying to align with those same qualities and values. And when you combine that with the purchasing power of women, I mean, for me, all the ingredients are there to have a huge amount of commercial success for the women's game. We plan for the first time to commercialize the Women's World Cup as a standalone event in the next edition in 2023. the past, it's always been bundled up with the Men's World Cup. So you can have the Men's World Cup. Oh, and by the way, you can also have this Women's World Cup and these Youth World Cups as well. Well, after France last year, with more than 1.12 billion fans tuning in from all around the world, it's very, very clear to us that there is a massive commercial interest in women's sports and in women's football in this case. And we really have to leverage that, because for me, every dollar that we can earn commercially is another dollar that we can spend on development and creating opportunities for girls at a grassroots level.
I think that's it as well, as this cycle that's created more sponsorship, more investment, more societal outputs, more benefits, more awareness. And it's just, you know, it's actually that feedback loop. That's a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
You have me excited about the potential there. I think there's another element where we're thinking about inclusion and empowerment, and that's a particular topic of interest for Susie. So Susie, intersectionality is a term that you used before, and a term that thankfully is becoming more and more commonly used and understood. And your work sits at the intersection of females in sport and disabled persons in sport, both people who struggle with lower media attention and lower public awareness. Do you have a call to action here? What sort of thoughts, what can we do to fix and change this?
I think this has been really interesting, and I've been in the world of disability sport for over 13 years. And one of the things I think that this panel has shown, and I think this is happening more, but I do think sports need to collaborate and share learning and share best practice, because I think where women's sport was probably 20 years ago, 10 years ago, disability sport in some ways still is. And especially then when you look through that as a lens of disabled women in sport, for example. And I think you have your amazing showpiece of elite sporting achievement with the Paralympic Games that occurs every 4 years for a Summer Games and every 4 years for a Winter Games. But other sports, there are many sporting opportunities, and taking cricket as an example, I think is a really good one. In the UK, I've been involved both on the board of the Lord's Taverners, which basically supports the young person's grassroots version of the game. I also sit as an advisor to the ECB, which is the national sporting governing body for cricket, and where the women's game has been really championed, and there's been real leadership around growing that and making sure that's been a focus, and looking at rights. So as the governing body, how do you work with broadcasters and how do you work with brands to bring the value to make sure that women's sport is front and centre of any brand activation? I think that disability sport is a bit further behind, and I think it would be really great to be able to look at some insight that touches on that intersectionality, because the Purple Pound, as it's called, which is the spending power of disabled people and their families, runs globally into the trillions, and in the UK it's around 270 billion. And those people might not want to participate in sport, but they're certainly sports fans, and brands can reach those fans. And of course, with disability, there can be accessibility needs around attending competitions or even viewing on TV. So I think that the community, the holistic community and ecosystem around sport, which is brands, which is broadcasters and the media, and which are the governing bodies, really can come together and affect great change here. So yeah, I think it's a really positive place to be, but disability sport isn't where women's sport is, and it should be. So my call to action would be, please, as brands, as influencers, as women in sport, encourage wherever you sit in that sport, whether you're driving the commercial side from a brand perspective, whether you're championing that from a rights holder perspective, think about what you can do to also champion disability and bring that forward in your planning too.
Now, you say the word insights, and I immediately went, ooh, I have to hand the mic to Sandra after this. But a thought came up for me as well from some research that we did, is that when you're advertising to an underrepresented audience, it's not just that audience that you actually get a higher rate of interest and a higher rate of appreciation for your brand. It's all the people, for example, that might know someone from that community, or have a connection, or someone that has actually no attachment whatsoever to that underrepresented community, but just is proud of the fact that actually this brand is standing up and featuring those individuals, those persons. Sandra, could I hand the mic to you and see if you had any thoughts on those insights?
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I mean, it's like anything. You might have the subject matter is one area, but more than just those people are interested in it, it's that indirect element again of the sharing. And now we're in the digital and social world and everybody's sharing everything and they want to know more about people's lives and how they've done it. That's exactly right. I think that's a really important area, that you aren't just focusing and targeting just those people. There's that wider audience of people who are interested and basically want to know the whys and the hows of it all.
Thank you, Sandra. So we do have some questions buzzing in the Q&A that I'd like to come to, and thanks to the audience for your participation. So the first one I'd like to hand to Olivia, please. It's around the female football statues and their vandalization. The question being, how do you recommend challenging the perception that male and female sports are competing against each other for visibility?
I think the idea of that the universe is absolute is a little bit wrong, because the more visibility and the more sports and the more we get in there, the bigger the universe will become. So it's not competing, but it's adding value. So I would say the more that we can bring value into this section, the greater the interest will be, that you will get the snowball effect rather than competing with each other. So I do believe that sort of all sports is for everyone, that we shouldn't segment too much and make it too niche in a way. So whether it's football, if it's male football, if it's female football, if it's sports with disabilities, anything, it goes for everybody. And I don't think it's our job to really segment who should like what. But our job is to see that we can get as wide reach as possible and that we can expand the universe.
Thank you, Olivia. There's another really great one around the audience. So when I'm thinking targeting, maybe I can bring Sarai back in with the football strategy. So what would be the most important audience to target? Women in sport, women watching sport, or all people watching sports? Not an easy one, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm going to pick D, all of the above. It's definitely all, and I'm going to link it back to this cycle. You know, when you have a young child in your family, or a friend or someone that you know that's participating in a sport, even at an amateur level, you're more likely to be drawn or interested in watching and engaging with that sport as a fan or as a consumer. So it's about targeting, you know, participation in sport. Not only for the commercial value of it, but also, you know, all the benefits that come for being a young girl playing in sports. It's about targeting a wider sports audience. You know, there's something beautiful, and obviously I'm going to talk about football here, but there's something so beautiful about, you know, women in sport. And for far too long, there's been a perception that women are lesser than in sports, and this is something we have to change. And in order to change that, we have to target the wider audience, not just the women that are watching. So it's really something that you kind of have to attack at every level. I don't think there's a magic pill or one secret way to do it. You really have to look at the entire ecosystem and come up with ways to address every part of it.
I was kind of hoping you were going to pick D. No, absolutely great response. And I just quickly, I wanted to come back maybe to Susie on this one. Susie, do you find there's a generational divide for following women's sports at all? Are they more popular with younger women and younger men?
I think that in terms of watching, I'm probably not the best person to ask that, and Sandra might have insight, but from my experience on the board of certain sports, I think there's definitely a point, and I think there's been a lot of research around this, where participation drops off. And so if you're trying to build a pathway through a sport, whether that's rugby or cricket, which I've been involved with at grassroots level, there's often a very good diverse mix at that grassroots young level, whether it's outside of school sport I'm talking about here. So participation is very gender balanced. It's very broad from an ethnicity perspective, and there are a good participation with young people with disabilities. And what tends to happen is, as you sort of go through a certain age group, I think sometimes it's because pathways into sport, and football is brilliant. I think the examples we've heard today, and I think the resource and the interest in football, I think, can lead the way for a lot of other sports. And how do you build those pathways through so that participation doesn't drop off, so that then you've got more women competing, so that you've got more women who want to go through to that elite level, and then the commercial opportunities come, and then the media attention comes, and it is this circle. We've talked about it before. So I think the challenge is then looking at other sports where there could be a wide participation at grassroots level, and where that doesn't funnel through to elite level, and what the barriers are. And you do need to do some systematic work to understand what those barriers are, and then really work hard to overcome them.
Thank you, Susie. Right, panel, I can't believe we're almost out of time, but I'd love to get a final thought from each of you. So what is your one key message or takeaway, speaking out to this global audience we have assembled today of clients, brand leaders, and media representation? Olivia, can I come to you first, please?
Of course. Now, I was thinking back to what someone said earlier as well, that it's up to us to use the platform that we have, and I think that's very well true. So we can all contribute to make a change in society, both on our personal life, but also through the choices we make in our professional life. And as a brand owner, we have an open channel to reach through to the consumers, and we can use the strength of a brand to do good in society. So my key words for takeaway would be to dare to raise your voice, to make people listen, because it's a busy environment that we're operating within. And if you really want to make a change, you need to be very loud. I think Apple said in a very nice way that the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that do. And I think there is something to that. We have to believe that we can make a change.
Wonderful. Sandra, what would be your one key takeaway?
I'm going to ask for two.
Go for it.
Well, the first one is just going back to my original point of brands. Don't forget the female fan. Don't let them be the forgotten fan. But my second one is, if you're going to commit brands, commit properly, commit really, really to the cause. And if you're going to support women's sport, really, really integrate it, or actually take it and champion it. And a colleague the other day said to me, and I'd never heard of this, don't just pink it and shrink it. So, don't just take something you've already got, make it pink and give them a little bit of something. I think that's a great phrase. Really commit to it. It's the investment needed in women's sport is the same, if not more, than men's sport. So I commit it and you will get reward.
Wonderful. Sarai, I saw you smiling and nodding. Please, let me bring you in. What would be your key takeaway or your challenge?
Look, this is a really amazing time for women. We had International Women's Day yesterday. There's a whole plethora of different activities and webinars and things, just inspirational things that are going on all over the globe because of this moment. And my challenge, I guess, would be to all of those that are watching is don't wait for this day in the year to champion women and to fight for equality and to do positive things for women within your organizations, to uplift, to connect. International Women's Day is one special day, absolutely. It's when the topics that we all like to discuss can be discussed on a wider level, but it doesn't mean that we have to wait for this one day per year, in order to really make an impact and to really think about what change we can make within our own organization.
Absolutely. Let's continue that conversation. And Susie, close us out, please. What is your takeaway?
I'm going to try and keep this brief, but I'm going to use something from the inclusion community, which is nothing about me without me. I really feel that as women, we all have a role to play, and as allies, everybody has a role to play in making sure that women are at the heart of decision making around sport. It's not a men's game anymore, it's everybody's game.
That was incredible. Yeah, I agree. not about me without me. This idea of involving the people that you're featuring in your brand campaigns or in any of your media in that conversation, as opposed to speaking on behalf of them. Yeah, wonderful, thank you. So I guess I'll just like to leave everyone with a quote from the Indian novelist Arundhati Roy, which goes, "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice, our hatred, our avarice and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Or perhaps to play sport for it, I say. See you on the field. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And click the link in the chat and it'll take you to all the other great events that we have through the rest of the week. And keep choosing to challenge in your everyday life, because International Women's Day is not just one day of the year. Thanks so much, everyone on the panel. Have a great day.